Hello and welcome back to Noble Green Wines. Today we're going to look at our first group of varietal wines, and we're focusing again on a lot of the French varieties. Now that isn't because we prefer French wine, it's simply because in the international wine scene it's mostly about these varieties from France. Some others are emerging from Italy and so forth, Zinfandel in California, having come originally from Primitivo in Italy, but we want to keep it simple just for the moment and look at three varieties from across France that found homes across the New World. One of the early proponents of wine in the New World was Thomas Jefferson. He was, before he was president, he was actually ambassador to France, the US ambassador to France, and he got his love of wine from there and tried to transplant it back to his native land. He wanted to create a real wine culture there. So he brought some vines back after he retired, or semi-retired, to his estate Monticello in Virginia. Now, a lot of these vines didn't thrive, never produced any viable wine. He never knew why, and it emerged later that this was because of the phylloxera louse that was devastating his vineyards, so he never really stood a chance. But the native American vines were actually resistant to the phylloxera vine, so a solution was eventually found where they grafted European vines onto these American rootstocks and saved the wine industry, because phylloxera then went all the way across Europe and beyond, devastating all the vineyards. All had to be grubbed up, pretty much everything, and replanted after that. Now, the first one I'm going to look at today, Sauvignon Blanc, is originally from the Loire Valley in France. As Sauvignon Fumé, it was originally mentioned in about the late 1700s in an area where it's now best known as Sancerre and Pouilly-sur-Loire, from where you get Pouilly-Fumé. And they're two of the most famous examples of Sauvignon Blanc. Now, in 1985, we had the first vintage of this wine, which was actually made by an Australian, Henry Honan from Cape Montel in Western Australia. And he knew that the Sauvignon was really well suited to the Wairau Valley in Marlborough. There was a few plantings there already. He wasn't a pioneer, but he knew that it had lovely sandy soils that was perfect for grape growing, a lovely moderate climate, slightly warmer than the Loire, with a moderating influence from the ocean nearby. And this worked really well for growing this particular grape. And the first vintage of this in 1985, it almost instantly became a cult classic. And all the New Zealand Sauvignons afterwards are pretty much modelled on it, or trying to move away from it stylistically. One of the key things they did, because they clearly did want to make something like a Sancerre or a Pouilly-Fumé, it's actually 5% barrel fermented. Now, this isn't to get any kind of oak influence into the wine. This is simply to add that little creamy complexity, that slightly oxidative edge that just knocks off some of the corners of Sauvignon, which can be quite angular and aggressive. One of the tasting notes from very early on is cat's pee on a gooseberry bush. Not the nicest phrase, but when you come to taste it, you might see what I mean about that. And it's particularly noticeable in some Kiwi Sauvignons. As well as the climate and all the other influences, they can actually use specific yeasts to extract some of those more pungent flavours. So the selection of yeast when you're fermenting the wine can actually influence that distinctively Kiwi flavour. And that's also why some wines from France you actually see labelled as Kiwi Cuvée. They're actually deliberately made it in that more pungent, herbaceous style. So if we come to taste the wine, let's pour out a little sample here. Immediately, before it even got to my nose, I'm getting that hit of nettles, that lovely herbaceous gooseberry character, loads of freshness, and a little bit, you can't taste any of the, sort of the barrel aging, but you're getting just a little bit of creaminess on the finish. Now, that is really, really high acidity. One of the important things about the Malborough region is the cool nights that retains that freshness and acidity, because without it, Sauvignon can taste a little bit odd. It is a naturally high acid grape, but if it doesn't retain enough of that acidity, you don't get that gorgeous balance between the lovely fruitiness of the wine and that gorgeous finish that's so refreshing. This is a really good food wine, perfect with something like fresh asparagus in season, goat's cheese, any kind of seafood. The local lobster that they catch around that area is fantastic with this wine. The second grape I want to look at today is yet again Chardonnay, and the reason I'm focusing so much on this throughout the series is because it's such a chameleon of a grape. It really illustrates how the vineyard and winemaking decisions can affect the way the wine tastes. Now, California, particularly the Napa and Sonoma Valley, Chardonnay's really found a fantastic home there. They make some of the best examples in the world, often exceeding Burgundies in price. One of the diversions I want to go on is the 1976 Judgment of Paris. Now, this was at the time when New World wines were really emerging on the European market, particularly in the UK. But in France, they were a bit resistant to it. There was an English wine merchant, Stephen Spurrier. He had a shop in Paris, and he decided to do a tasting. Just for a bit of fun, he got some French wine tasters and wine experts, sommeliers, in to taste some California wines blind against some Bordeaux and Burgundy wines. And unfortunately, even he didn't realise this would happen. Most of the US wines won. Chateau Montelena from Napa actually beat a really good Merceau in that tasting, along with many others, and it really turned the world of wine on its head. The French wine tasters weren't very happy with this. Many of them cried foul, saying it was rigged, but it wasn't. It was a fair contest. They tasted the wines blind, and not just as a result of that, but the wines started gaining traction in the wider market. Now, this example here is much more modestly priced than Chateau Montelena, but it's a really good example of Californian Chardonnay. It's from Loach, their heritage Chardonnay. Now, this has had about 10 months in oak, American oak in this case, but also what you immediately get on the nose is much more tropical fruit coming through. Guava, papaya, there's real warmth of fruit coming through here. There's definitely oak on the finish as well, but this wine isn't all about the oak. On the palate, you're getting loads of that fruit again, melon, lovely sort of oaky finish. The oak's coming through much more on the palate actually with that lovely creaminess. A little bit of butteriness from a malolactic fermentation as well, that we talked about earlier. Just gives the wine that lovely rounded character. And again, a little bit of acidity on the finish. This is a nicely balanced wine. This would be really great with something like glazed ham, chicken, dare I say, Christmas dinner, or any kind of sort of richer fish dish like grilled Dover sole. The third wine I want to look at today is the Chenin Blanc from South Africa. Now, Chenin is originally from the Loire Valley in France. It makes some really, really lovely wines, everything from bone dry right through to lusciously sweet and everything in between. The most famous example is probably Vouvray, which you see over here. Really good food wine. Now, this example is from Stellenbosch, which is about 40 kilometres east from Cape Town in South Africa. A warm climate, slightly warmer than Bordeaux, not hot certainly. Quite often you see Chenin Blanc blended with Colombard as a table wine because even in very hot climates, its naturally high acidity keeps it nice and fresh. So this, from Post House, the stamp of Chenin, is quite a rich wine. It's had some time in oak. Already you can see compared to the other two wines, it's a little bit darker in colour. Chenin tends to be, but also I think we've picked up a little bit of colour from the oak aging. Really quite a rich wine, lots of orange peel, barley sugar, honey. There's absolutely loads in there, a little bit of toastiness on the finish. Again, this is a dry wine, but with that little sort of lovely honeyed note and barley sugar, it actually tastes a little bit sweeter than it is. Really well balanced, really high acidity, really lovely. This is such a good wine to have with something like creamy fish pie, paella, Dover sole, any of those sort of things. So until next time, happy drinking.